What would you do if you found yourself alone, miles away from civilization, with only the eerie silence of the forest for company? Would you feel at peace, or would you begin to sense the presence of something watching, waiting for the right moment to strike? In the deep, uncharted woods of the Olympic National Park, I thought I had escaped the chaos of the world. But there are things in those woods, things that should never be disturbed. Things that were there long before humans set foot in those trees, lurking in the shadows, creatures so ancient, they don't belong in our world. I thought I was prepared. I had my rifle, my dog, and the quiet solitude I craved. But nothing could prepare me for what happened next. Subscribe now and don't miss a single moment of the nightmare that followed. If you dare, stay with me as I tell you why living off the grid is far more dangerous than you think. Part 1. The escape from society. There's a certain peace you find in isolation. The world moves at a pace too fast for most, a blur of chaos and noise. But in the woods, the pace slows. The earth beneath your feet has its own rhythm. The air is thick with silence, broken only by the whispers of the wind through the trees or the occasional crack of a branch. You breathe it in, and for the first time in years, you feel like you can actually hear yourself think. For a while, that's enough. That was the dream I had when I left everything behind. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and I used to be a lawyer in the chaos of Seattle. The billable hours, the endless arguments, the hollow victories, it wore me down, drained me of something I couldn't quite place. But the turning point came when I realized I was no longer fighting for justice. I was fighting for power, for status, for wealth. I had become a part of the machine I once despised, and I couldn't stand it any longer. So I left. I packed up what little I had, sold everything that tied me to the city, and bought a cabin in the middle of nowhere. The land was remote, far from the nearest town, Olympic National Park to be exact. It was a small cabin built with my own hands. The only thing I had in the world was the land and my dog, Shadow. The idea was simple: escape. Live off the grid, away from people, away from expectations. At first, it felt like freedom. The stillness of the forest wrapped around me like a blanket, and the cold mountain air felt cleaner than anything I'd breathed in years. I didn't need much. A wood stove to keep the cabin warm, a small garden for food, and a rifle for hunting. Shadow kept me company, an old shepherd mix with gray fur around his muzzle. He'd been my only companion for the past few months, and for a while, that was enough. But the first night I spent in the cabin was a reminder of why solitude is a double-edged sword. The cabin was small, but I had enough room for my necessities. The only light came from the crackling fire I built in the stove and the moonlight that poured through the small window. I had spent the evening unpacking, arranging things in their place, and feeling the weight of the decision I'd made. It was the first time in years I hadn't felt the pressure to meet anyone's expectations, and in that quiet, I felt a strange peace. I made myself a simple dinner, nothing extravagant, just beans and venison I'd shot earlier that afternoon. As the firelight flickered against the walls, casting long shadows, I ate slowly, savoring the quiet. The only sounds were the occasional crackle of the fire and the distant rustle of the trees outside. It was almost too perfect. But then, I heard it. A soft scratching sound against the side of the cabin. At first I thought it was just the wind, the old wood settling in the cold night air. But then I heard it again. It was slow, deliberate, as if something was testing the walls of my home. Shadow, lying at my feet, raised his head. His ears perked up and he let out a low growl, a sound I had never heard from him before. I got up, cautiously, and walked toward the door. I didn't know what I expected, but my instincts told me to be careful. I grabbed the rifle I had leaned against the wall earlier, just for peace of mind. It was strange, really, how quickly I had fallen into this sense of needing to protect myself out here. But something about the way the forest was still unnervingly still made my skin crawl. I stepped outside, my boots crunching the frozen earth beneath me. The air was thick with moisture, the kind that feels heavy against your lungs. The usual sounds of the forest were absent. No chirping birds, no rustling leaves, just the faint, rhythmic sound of my own breath and the pounding of my heart in my ears. Shadow stayed close behind me, his body tense, every muscle coiled like a spring. As I approached the side of the cabin, I scanned the tree line. There was nothing. No movement, no rustling, just the cold, dark woods. I let out a sigh, more out of frustration than relief, and started to turn back. Then I saw it. A shadow. A figure just beyond the trees. It was tall, towering above the underbrush, but it didn't move like anything I'd ever seen before. It was hunched over, its limbs too long, too. Unnatural. For a moment I thought it might be a bear, maybe a mountain lion, though it seemed too large for either. But the way it stood, the way it loomed there in the darkness, it was something else entirely. Something wrong. My heart pounded in my chest and my breath caught in my throat. I raised my rifle, my hands shaking, my mind racing. The figure didn't move at first. It just stood there, watching me, its eyes gleaming faintly in the moonlight. I couldn't tell if it was animal or something else. I had seen many things in my years of living, but this was unlike anything I had ever encountered. I shouted. "Who's there?" No answer. I don't know why I did it, but something in me snapped. I raised the rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The figure flinched, but instead of running, it tilted its head, as if studying me. Then, without a single sound, it darted back into the forest. The speed at which it moved, impossibly fast, like something out of a nightmare, left me breathless. I didn't move for a moment. I just stood there, rifle still raised, eyes scanning the dark, looking for any sign of its return. But there was nothing. The woods were still. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt the weight of my isolation. The silence felt suffocating, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. I turned and hurried back to the cabin, my heart still racing, but my mind running wild with what I'd just seen. I locked the door behind me. Shadow had retreated to his bed by the fireplace, his eyes wide and alert, but not growling. I don't know if he had seen what I had, or if he just sensed the same feeling of unease in the air. I leaned my rifle against the wall, but my fingers still trembled. My mind raced, replaying the events. It didn't make sense. What was it? Was it a bear? A wild animal? No, it was something else, something unnatural. I didn't sleep much that night. The sound of the wind, the scratching outside, and the eerie silence of the forest kept me on edge. Shadow never left my side, and as I lay awake, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone out here, not in the way I thought, and whatever was out there, it wasn't going to let me go. Part 2. Signs of Unseen Eyes. The next day, I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling from the night before. It wasn't easy, though. It never is when you realize the world you thought you knew is a little less predictable than you'd like to believe. I had come here to find peace, to escape the noise of the world, and for a moment the woods had delivered. But now I wasn't so sure. I had hoped the strange events were a fluke, maybe just my imagination working overtime in the silence of the forest. But as the days passed, the unease only grew stronger. The quiet that surrounded me, once soothing, now felt suffocating. The absence of the usual sounds of the forest, the birds, the rustling leaves, even the wind, was like the world had gone mute. There were moments, fleeting and barely noticeable, when the air seemed too thick, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for something. I spent the morning hunting, trying to focus on the mundane tasks that had once calmed me. The familiar sound of the rifle's report, the steady rhythm of my boots crunching through the underbrush. It should have been grounding. But even as I trudged through the woods, I felt that prickle of awareness at the back of my neck, the unmistakable feeling that something was watching me. That afternoon, I decided to do something productive to distract myself. Gather more firewood. There was something reassuring about the act of chopping wood, the steady rhythm of the axe hitting the log, the crack of it splitting down the middle. But no matter how focused I tried to be, my mind kept drifting back to the events of the past few days. Shadow was with me as usual, and at first he seemed fine, his usual loyal self, tail wagging, nose to the ground. But then something changed. He froze, his tail stiffening, ears perked up, staring into the distance. It wasn't the kind of thing I'd seen from him before. Usually he was calm and nonchalant, even around deer or wild boars. But this time he was different. Shadow. I called out softly, though I was starting to feel the unease creeping into my own body. He didn't respond. His body was rigid, every muscle tight as if he were preparing for a fight or a flight. I scanned the woods in front of me, trying to make out what had caught his attention, but the trees were thick, and the shadows played tricks on my eyes. Nothing. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That same feeling that had crept over me last night, that feeling of being seen by something just beyond the veil of the trees. I grabbed my rifle and slowly walked towards the tree line, where Shadow was still fixated. My steps were cautious, deliberate. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement, something fast, something large enough to cause the stillness around us to deepen. The air felt suddenly heavy, like the forest was holding its breath again. I didn't see the figure at first. It was just a shift in the underbrush, like something had brushed past. But the movement was deliberate, not random, too calculated. And then I saw it, an unnatural shadow, tall and hunched, darting between the trees. My heart skipped a beat. My fingers tightened around the rifle. The figure didn't move like an animal. It was wrong. Its gait was stiff, jerky, as if it were still figuring out how to move, like it had just learned to walk. It wasn't an animal. It couldn't be. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my body frozen. I should have turned around, should have run back to the cabin. But instead I stood there, heart pounding, watching as it disappeared deeper into the woods, vanishing into the darkness between the trees. When I finally regained control of my legs, I turned back, feeling the pulse of fear hammering in my chest. Shadow had started to whine, low and guttural. He was pacing in circles now, his fur standing on end, and I couldn't bring myself to call him down. He was scared. We were both scared. I stumbled back toward the cabin, trying to push the image of the creature out of my mind, trying to reason with myself. Maybe it was a bear, maybe a wild boar, something unusual. But I knew deep down that I was lying to myself. That wasn't a bear. That wasn't a wild animal. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. I hurried inside, bolting the door behind me, the sounds of Shadow's anxious pacing filling the cabin. I tried to tell myself it was fine, that it was just an animal, just something that had gotten too close. But my gut told me otherwise. The night stretched on. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, but I couldn't relax. Every creak of the wood, every pop of the flames felt like an invitation to whatever was out there. I kept checking the windows, scanning the trees, half expecting to see that same shape lurking just beyond the cabin's light. It was hours before I could force myself to fall asleep, but even then, the nightmares came. Shadows moved through the trees, figures with elongated limbs and glowing eyes. They whispered in the dark, their voices low and unnatural. And in every dream, I could feel the cold, wet breath of something just behind me, its claws scraping the ground as it got closer, closer, until I would wake up, gasping for air, the feeling of its presence still lingering in the room. By morning, I told myself I had to let it go. I had to go about my day. But deep inside, I knew I couldn't ignore what was happening. The forest was changing. The peace I'd sought here had already begun to crack. I wasn't sure what I had seen the night before, but I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer alone out here. Something was watching me. And no matter how hard I tried to deny it, I couldn't escape the feeling that it was only a matter of time before it made itself known again. Part 3. The Forest Silence. The days passed, but the air around me felt heavier with each one. The wind had stopped blowing, and the birds, where had they gone? There were no chirping birds at dawn. No rustling leaves to tell me the forest was still alive. The woods had become a vast, oppressive silence, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. I told myself it was nothing to worry about, just the natural ebb and flow of life in the wild. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I tried to distract myself. I hunted for food, worked on fixing up the cabin, even ventured to the stream to fetch water, anything to keep my mind busy. But everything felt different now. The stillness of the trees, the way the air seemed thick and suffocating like it was closing in around me. The forest was no longer a peaceful retreat. It was watching me. That afternoon, as I worked to split some firewood, I felt it again. That sensation creeping over my skin, the feeling of being watched. I stopped mid-swing, axe hovering in the air, and scanned the woods around me. Nothing. But even as I turned back to my task, I couldn't shake the unease. Shadow had been eerily quiet. He stood a few paces away, his nose twitching, eyes wide and alert, staring into the trees. He was fixated on something. Shadow. I called softly, but he didn't respond. He was too focused, too still. I slowly set down the axe, my eyes never leaving the tree line. The wind had picked up, but it wasn't the same. It was cold, unnaturally cold, the kind of chill that sinks deep into your bones. The air smelled off, like damp earth mixed with something metallic. As I crept closer to Shadow, I caught movement at the edge of my vision. A shape darted through the trees, too quick for me to fully see, but it was large. Larger than anything I'd ever seen in the woods. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for my rifle, but my hands were shaking. My pulse quickened as I slowly approached the spot where Shadow was still staring. My footfalls were soft, but every snap of a twig beneath my boots felt like a drumbeat, echoing through the silence of the forest. And then I saw it. It was just a shadow at first, moving between the trees. It was tall, too tall. Maybe 7 feet, maybe more. It hunched over, its limbs too long and spindly, almost insect-like. The shape darted in and out of the shadows, too quick to make out fully, but I could feel its eyes on me. The air grew colder. Shadow growled low in his throat, and I felt my heart stop. That wasn't a growl of warning, it was fear. The kind of fear only an animal could recognize. Suddenly, the silence broke. A bone-chilling, unnatural screech rang out from the woods, like a mix between a bat's echoing shriek and the howl of a wolf. My hair stood on end. I froze in place, trying to locate the source of the sound, but it was everywhere. The sound vibrated through the trees, a low, guttural rumble that made the ground tremble beneath my feet. It wasn't just a noise, it was a warning. A primal warning. Before I could react, the air around me seemed to thicken. My lungs felt like they were being squeezed as I inhaled, the air growing denser, colder. Then the creature stepped into the clearing. It was taller than I had imagined, its body a grotesque amalgamation of fur, muscle, and scale. The fur was matted, uneven, like it hadn't been groomed in years, and the patches of exposed skin glistened with something black and oily, like tar. Its head, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. Its face was distorted, a grotesque mix of wolf and something more ancient. Its mouth opened unnaturally wide, revealing rows of jagged, yellowed teeth, teeth too sharp, too large to belong to anything in nature. The creature's eyes, dark, void-like eyes, locked with mine. I don't know what I saw in them, but it wasn't the wildness of an animal. It was something far worse. It was intelligence. A cold, calculating intelligence that sent waves of terror crashing over me. I wanted to run. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get the hell out of there, but my feet were rooted to the ground. It was as if the creature was pulling me in with its gaze. The forest had fallen silent once again, the only sound the heavy breathing of the creature as it approached. I didn't know what to do. I lifted my rifle, but my hands were trembling so badly that I couldn't keep it steady. The creature took a step forward, its claws scraping against the earth with a sickening screech, as if it was savoring the fear in the air. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature lunged. Everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the forest floor, my rifle a few feet away from me. My body felt like it had been run over by a truck. My head was pounding and I struggled to sit up. Shadow was beside me, whimpering, his fur matted with dirt and blood. But it wasn't his blood. It was mine. I staggered to my feet, and that's when I saw it. The creature had vanished back into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the eerie silence. I couldn't think. My head spun. My legs felt like jelly beneath me, but I knew one thing. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't done with me. The forest wasn't done with me. I don't know how I made it back to the cabin. My mind was a blur, adrenaline coursing through my veins, but all I could focus on was the creature. The thing that shouldn't exist, that shouldn't be in this world. The moment I got inside, I bolted the door and collapsed in front of the fire, gasping for air. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to scream. But all I could do was sit there, trembling, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't make sense of. The silence in the forest outside was unbearable. Even the wind had stopped. But it wasn't the wind I was afraid of anymore. It was what was out there, watching, waiting. And I knew that no matter how far I ran, no matter how fast I tried to escape, it was never going to leave me. Ethan's worst fears are realized. The creature is real, and it's hunting him. The silence of the forest becomes oppressive, the atmosphere thick with unease. Ethan's encounter with the creature leaves him physically and emotionally shaken, pushing him to the brink of panic. The creature is no longer a distant possibility. It's real, and it's far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. Part 4. First encounter with the creature. The morning after the attack, I woke up feeling as though I had been pulled from the very edge of reality. The events of the night before replayed in my mind like a nightmare that wouldn't let me go. The terror I had felt when the creature, whatever it was, lunged at me, the sound of its claws scraping against the earth, the raw, guttural growls, they had all become seared into my memory. I had survived, but barely. Shadow, my once calm and steady companion, was now a nervous wreck, his eyes wide and alert as if he could still feel the creature's presence nearby. We didn't leave the cabin that day. I sat by the fire, staring at the flickering flames, trying to make sense of what had happened. What had I seen? Was it a bear, a mutated animal, or something far worse? I had no answers, but the unanswered questions haunted me. There were things in the forest, things I couldn't explain. But the worst part wasn't that I didn't understand what I had seen. The worst part was the feeling, that gnawing sensation at the back of my mind that I wasn't alone. Not just in the forest, but in my own cabin. As the days passed, I tried to convince myself that it was just a bad experience, something I had imagined in the chaos of my fear. I needed to move on. But the creature, or whatever it was, had become a constant presence in my mind. Even as I tried to go about my daily routines, chopping wood, hunting, gathering water, there was a feeling that crept over me. It was like being constantly watched. The silence around me had become suffocating, and the deeper I ventured into the woods, the more I felt the heavy weight of something lurking just beyond my vision. Then one evening the silence was broken. I was standing near the edge of the forest, chopping wood to prepare for the colder nights ahead when I heard it. A sound, faint but distinct, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, like someone or something was walking through the forest, purposefully heading toward me. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal, this was something else. The footsteps were too calculated, too rhythmically placed. I froze, my axe mid-swing, the sound of my breath loud in my ears. I looked over my shoulder, trying to pierce the thick shadows of the trees with my gaze, but there was nothing. No movement, just the dense, quiet woods. For a moment I told myself it was just my imagination again. The stress, the isolation, it was getting to me. But then Shadow, who had been quietly lying nearby, jumped up with a low growl, his fur bristling. He stood firm, his body rigid, his ears perked up in the direction of the forest. He could hear it too. I grabbed my rifle from where it rested against the cabin and slowly made my way toward the woods, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps continued, each step closer than the last. It was deliberate, like it knew I was here. I reached the tree line, the rifle heavy in my hands, my fingers trembling. But the deeper I moved into the forest, the more the footsteps seemed to fade, as if they were moving away from me. I stopped. The woods had gone silent again, but the silence felt different. It felt heavier. It felt like something was waiting. The air was thick, charged with an almost tangible tension. My breath came out in shallow bursts, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't know what to do. Should I call out? Should I turn back? But before I could make a decision, I heard something else. A low, eerie humming sound. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was a sound that sent a cold chill crawling up my spine. I had heard it before, but I couldn't place where. It wasn't like anything I'd ever encountered in the woods. The sound was coming from behind me now, from somewhere deeper in the forest, hidden in the shadows. I turned around slowly, my eyes scanning the darkness. The humming grew louder, and with it, a sense of dread began to settle in my chest. It was too calculated, too deliberate, like it was luring me. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker of movement. A silhouette, barely visible against the backdrop of the trees. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw it clearly. It was the same creature I had encountered before, the twisted, grotesque form standing on two legs. Its body was even larger now, a hulking mass of fur and scale. Its face was more pronounced, more menacing. Its eyes locked with mine, glowing faintly, a sickly yellow that seemed to pierce straight through me. I froze, my hands clammy around the rifle. I should have fired, I should have run, but my legs wouldn't move. The creature's gaze held me in place, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. It took a slow step forward, and I could hear the crunch of the ground beneath its feet. The humming sound continued, coming from its throat, resonating through the trees like some kind of sick lullaby. The creature's lips curled into something that might have been a smile, but it was far from comforting. It was predatory, malicious. It knew what it was doing. It was toying with me. I could see its claws now, sharp and elongated, glinting in the pale moonlight. The creature didn't make a sound as it moved closer, its body swaying slightly with each step, its movements almost too fluid. It was like watching something out of a nightmare, something that didn't belong in this world. I raised the rifle, my finger trembling on the trigger. But before I could fire, the creature let out a deafening screech, a sound so high-pitched that my ears rang. It was unlike anything I had ever heard, a mixture of pain and rage filled with malice. The force of it sent a wave of nausea through me, and for a moment I thought I might pass out. Then the creature lunged. I fired. The shot rang out through the forest, deafening in the stillness. The creature screeched again, but this time it stumbled back, its body jerking in an unnatural way. It seemed to be confused, momentarily disoriented by the blast. But it wasn't scared. Not in the way an animal would be. It was almost like it was mocking me. It moved faster than I could react, too quick, too erratic. Its claws slashed at the air in front of me, missing by inches, but the sheer force of the swipe knocked the rifle from my hands. I stumbled back, but before I could regain my footing, the creature was on top of me. The stench of it was unbearable, rotting meat, decay, and something far worse. Its breath was hot and putrid against my face as I struggled to push it away. But it was strong, too strong. I could feel its claws tearing into my jacket, its weight pressing me into the ground. I kicked, I struggled, but it was futile. The creature's grip tightened, and I felt the sharp pain as its claws scraped against my skin. My vision blurred, and for a moment I thought this was it. This was how I was going to die. But then I remembered the hunting knife I always carried. With a cry of desperation, I drew the blade and shoved it into the creature's side. It recoiled with a deafening roar, but I held on, twisting the knife with all the strength I had left. It staggered back, its body jerking, but it didn't go down. And then it stopped. The creature stood there, its body trembling with rage. Its eyes burned with an unholy fire, and it seemed to be deciding something, its gaze flicking between me and the surrounding trees. It let out a final, bone-chilling screech, then turned and disappeared into the woods, moving with a speed I couldn't comprehend. I lay there for a long moment, gasping for breath, my body aching with pain. My hands trembled as I reached for the rifle, but I couldn't bring myself to raise it again. The creature was gone for now, but I knew it wouldn't be the last time I encountered it. The woods were still, but the silence was different now, thicker, heavier, more oppressive. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. Shadow whimpered softly from behind me, and I finally got to my feet. My body felt like it was made of lead, my legs barely holding me up. I stumbled back toward the cabin, my mind racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. But the forest had become a nightmare, and no matter how far I ran, I knew the creature would always be out there. Watching. Part 5. The sense of being tracked. The cabin had never felt smaller. The walls seemed to close in with each passing hour, and the once familiar sounds of the forest now felt like a constant reminder of the danger lurking just beyond my doorstep. The creature had shown itself to be not only real but deadly, far more than I could have ever anticipated. And now, as the days blurred together, I couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that I was being hunted. The trap of silence. I had always known that the wilderness could be dangerous, that there were predators in the woods, and that solitude often meant an unsettling silence. But there was something different about the quiet here, something unnatural. The wind had stopped howling, the birds had stopped chirping, and the air felt thick, stagnant. It wasn't just a lack of sound. It was as though the very atmosphere had shifted, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Every time I ventured out to chop wood or gather water, I had to fight the rising dread in my chest. It felt as though eyes were upon me unseen, but they're all the same. It was impossible to shake the feeling that something was following me, always just out of sight, but never far enough away to make me feel truly safe. The forest turns against me. One afternoon, I decided to take a longer trek through the woods, hoping that getting some distance from the cabin would help clear my mind. I packed my rifle, though the weapon felt inadequate against the overwhelming sense of dread that gnawed at me. Shadow, who had been more subdued than usual, reluctantly followed. It wasn't his usual behavior. He was usually the one urging me to go further, exploring every nook and cranny of the forest. But now he walked at my side, his ears flat against his head, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows of the trees. We made our way deeper into the forest, away from the clearing around the cabin. The further we went, the more the silence weighed on me. It was like a heavy cloak, oppressive and unyielding, wrapping itself around us as we moved. That's when I heard it, the soft, faintest rustle of leaves behind me. I turned quickly, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. Just the trees, still and unmoving. Shadow had stopped too, his body stiff with tension, eyes darting between the trunks of the trees. The feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't the usual paranoia, it was something far worse. It was the instinctive, bone-deep certainty that something was stalking me. I turned and began walking faster, my mind racing. My pulse was hammering in my ears, but I tried to tell myself it was just the forest, that it was just an animal, a deer or a boar. But even as I tried to convince myself, my feet picked up their pace. The crunch of leaves underfoot seemed to echo through the trees, as if every step was being heard by something, or someone else. The watcher in the woods. We didn't make it far before I saw the first sign that something wasn't right. A tree, its trunk marked by deep gouges, stood ahead of us. The scratches were too wide, too deep to be made by anything natural. Something had dug into the bark with an unnatural strength, leaving deep, jagged marks that ran down the entire length of the tree. My mind flashed to the creature, the one I had encountered weeks ago, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Shadow growled low in his throat, his body tensed beside me. I reached down and scratched behind his ears, trying to comfort him, but my own hands trembled. Something was out there. It was marking its territory, and it was closer than I wanted to believe. I pressed on, trying to shake the unease, but I couldn't ignore the growing dread that clung to me. Every step I took felt like I was drawing closer to a trap. The woods, once an escape, now felt like a maze, each tree and shadow hiding something just out of sight, waiting for me to wander deeper. The moment of terror. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The temperature dropped rapidly, and I realized that I had been walking for longer than I intended. I turned to head back, but just as I did, I heard a crack, a sharp, sudden sound that made me freeze in place. It came from behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding, my body instinctively reaching for my rifle. And that's when I saw it. A shape, barely visible in the dimming light, stood at the edge of the clearing. It was tall, too tall for a man, too unnaturally still. It was hunched over, its face obscured by the shadow of the trees. But even in the low light, I could make out the unmistakable outline of its form. It was the creature. I knew it immediately. But this time, it wasn't just standing there. It was watching me, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. There was no hesitation, no sudden movement like before. It stood there just waiting. The air around me felt thick, heavy, as though time had slowed down. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to turn around and flee, but my body refused to move. My eyes were locked onto the creature, unable to look away. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature moved. It was fast, impossibly fast. In the blink of an eye, it was no longer standing at the edge of the clearing. It was charging toward me, its elongated limbs reaching out with terrifying speed. I fired. The shot rang out, loud and deafening, but the creature didn't flinch. It didn't stop. In fact, it seemed to move even faster, darting to the side, its speed something that shouldn't be possible. Another shot. It didn't even slow down. The chase. I turned and ran. I didn't think, I didn't stop. I just ran faster than I had ever run before. My legs burned, my breath came in ragged gasps, but I kept moving. I had no choice. Behind me, I could hear the creature's growl, low and guttural, echoing through the trees. It was gaining on me, its footsteps heavy, its breathing harsh and labored. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't escape. The sound of the forest became a blur, the crashing of branches, the snap of twigs beneath its feet. But I was slower, weaker. I could feel the creature closing in, feel the heat of its breath on my back. And then, just as I thought it was over, I stumbled, falling to the ground with a heavy thud. My rifle flew from my hands and I scrambled to get up, but my body was too slow. The creature was almost upon me. I turned and faced it, knowing there was no way out. But then, as if some invisible force intervened, the creature stopped. It stood there, watching me, its glowing eyes fixed on mine. For a long, terrifying moment, I thought it would pounce, tear me apart right then and there. But instead, it slowly turned its head, as if hearing something in the distance. Its gaze never left me, but there was something almost calculating in the way it moved. It wasn't attacking, it was waiting. Time seemed to stretch on forever as I lay there, heart pounding, unable to move. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. What was this thing? Why wasn't it killing me? The creature shifted slightly, its gaze flickering towards something deeper in the forest. It let out a low growl, a warning or perhaps a command. And then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared into the woods, moving with terrifying speed. I didn't wait for it to change its mind. I didn't look back. I stumbled to my feet, my body shaking uncontrollably, and I ran. I ran harder than I ever had before, my legs burning with exhaustion. My mind focused solely on getting back to the cabin, where I could lock the door and never leave again. But even as I fled, I knew one thing. The creature was out there, and it wasn't done with me. Part 6. The Deadly Encounter. The sun had already disappeared behind the trees by the time I stumbled back into the clearing near the cabin. My chest burned with exhaustion, my legs felt like they were made of lead, and my hands were still trembling from the terror of what had just happened. I had run blindly, pushing myself farther than I ever thought I could, only to return to the same place that had once felt like my sanctuary. Now it felt like a trap. Shadow had followed me, but he was moving slower now, his head low, tail between his legs. He wasn't barking or growling anymore. He was subdued, like a dog that knew something was wrong but couldn't figure out what it was. I could feel his fear and I couldn't blame him. I was scared too. The creature, the thing that had chased me, was still out there, and it wasn't just some wild animal. It was something far worse, something unnatural, an unwelcome visitor. I closed the door behind me, my heart still racing. I leaned against it, trying to catch my breath, but the room felt suffocating. The walls of the cabin, once comforting, now seemed to close in on me. The air was heavy, thick with the lingering presence of the creature. The silence was unbearable, the kind of silence that screams at you, forcing you to listen to every small noise, every creak of the floorboards. The cabin no longer felt like a safe haven. It felt like a tomb. Shadow whimpered from the corner, his eyes darting around the room, unable to settle. I knelt beside him, trying to calm him, but my hands were shaking too much. I couldn't stop thinking about the way the creature had moved, its unnatural speed and agility. It had been toying with me, enjoying the chase, enjoying the fear. I couldn't help but wonder why it hadn't killed me. It had every opportunity to end me right then and there, but it hadn't. What did it want? Why had it stopped? I tried to make sense of it all, but my mind was too clouded. The terror had set in, and I was too exhausted to think clearly. So instead, I did what anyone would do when they feel cornered. I locked the doors, barricaded the windows, and prepared for the worst. The night of screams. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, its eyes glowing in the darkness, its claws reaching for me. I could still hear the sound of its heavy breathing, the scraping of its claws against the ground. Every noise outside the cabin was amplified in my mind. The wind howled, rattling the windows. The trees creaked and groaned in the breeze. But the worst part was the silence that would fall between the sounds, the moments where everything would go still. It was in those moments that I knew something was coming. The first time I heard it, I didn't recognize it. A faint noise, barely audible above the wind, like something scratching, dragging itself across the ground. I froze, straining my ears, trying to pinpoint the sound. It was distant but unmistakable. It was like something, or someone, was moving around the cabin, circling it, waiting. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't alone. I grabbed the rifle, but my hands were unsteady. I checked the windows, peeking out between the curtains, but there was nothing. The trees outside were still, the forest holding its breath. I couldn't see anything, but I felt its presence. The scratching grew louder. It was coming closer. The attack. Suddenly, the door to the cabin rattled violently. The force of the impact nearly knocked me off my feet. Shadow yelped, his body rigid, as if the noise had paralyzed him. I rushed to the door, pressing my back against it, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I could feel something pressing against the other side, something heavy, something strong. The door creaked as the creature began to push against it, its claws scraping across the wood with a terrifying screech. My heart raced. I could feel the floor beneath me trembling as the thing outside tried to force its way inside. The wood groaned under its weight, and for a moment I was certain it was going to break through. The pressure against the door was almost unbearable, but then, as quickly as it had started, the pressure stopped. The door went still. I held my breath, trying to listen, trying to hear any sign that the creature had gone, but there was nothing. The silence was deafening. The world outside had gone quiet again. I slowly eased away from the door, my pulse hammering in my chest. I had to do something. I couldn't just wait here and hope it would leave. I needed to fight back. But as I reached for my rifle, I heard a noise, something scratching against the window on the far side of the cabin. I spun around, rifle raised, but there was nothing to see. Just the shadows of the trees swaying in the breeze, the moonlight casting long, distorted shapes across the ground. But the scratching didn't stop. It continued, moving along the side of the cabin from one window to the next. The creature wasn't just outside. It was all around me, circling, watching. I could feel its eyes on me even though I couldn't see it. My mind raced. I had to do something. Suddenly, the window beside me shattered, face to face with the monster. I didn't see it coming. One moment the window was intact. The next, it exploded inward, shards of glass flying in all directions. I barely had time to react before the creature was inside, its long, gnarled claws tearing through the frame as though it was made of paper. It was faster than I had ever imagined, a blur of motion and terror. It lunged at me with a deafening roar, its maw snapping shut inches from my face. I fired blindly, the rifle recoiling in my hands, but the creature was already on top of me, its claws slashing at the air. I could feel its weight pressing down on me as we collided with the floor, the sharp pain of its claws raking through my jacket and into my skin. I fought back with everything I had, kicking, punching, scrambling for the knife I kept at my side, but the creature was relentless. Its claws were everywhere, raking across my chest, my arms, my legs. I could feel the blood pooling beneath me as I struggled to breathe, as I tried to break free from its grip. It was far stronger than I was, far faster. In the chaos, I managed to grab the knife. With all my strength, I shoved it into the creature's side, twisting it with desperation. The thing screeched, a sound that felt like it was tearing through my soul. It recoiled, but only for a moment before it snapped back toward me, its eyes glowing brighter than ever. I didn't have time to think. I lunged at it again, my knife finding its mark once more, this time deeper. The creature let out a strangled howl, its body jerking with the force of the blow. For a moment I thought I had killed it, but I was wrong. With one final, horrible scream, the creature twisted in the air, its claws tearing into my side, its teeth sinking into my flesh. I felt the world go black, a narrow escape. When I came to, the creature was gone. The cabin was still. But the silence felt wrong, deadly wrong. The air was thick with blood, and I could feel the sharp sting of my wounds. My body ached, but I forced myself to sit up to look around. Shadow was gone. The window was shattered, the floor littered with glass, and the walls were soaked in blood. I had survived, but just barely. But there was something else. Something in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The creature might have retreated, but it wasn't gone. It was waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for me to step outside the walls of my sanctuary. Part 7. Seeking answers in town. The creature had disappeared back into the woods, but it wasn't gone. I could feel it, its presence still lingering in the air, heavy and oppressive. I had narrowly escaped death, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it came back for me. The terrifying chase through the woods, the savage attack in the cabin, all of it replayed in my mind, each image seared into my memory. The wounds from the creature's claws were deep, and I could feel the pain growing with every movement. My body was aching, every breath a reminder of how close I had come to being torn apart. But what terrified me more than the physical wounds was the feeling of being hunted, stalked by something that wasn't entirely animal. The creature didn't act like any wild beast. It was intelligent, calculating, and it was toying with me. I couldn't stay here any longer. The cabin was no longer a refuge, it was a trap. So with Shadow by my side, I made the decision to leave, to head to the nearest town for help, or at least some answers. The road to Forks. The drive to Forks, Washington, was a blur. I barely remember the journey, the road stretching endlessly before me as the pain from my injuries made it hard to concentrate. The townspeople would have no idea what I was coming to tell them, no idea of the horrors lurking in the woods just outside their town. I could already feel the doubt creeping into my mind. Would anyone believe me? How could I explain what had happened? The forest had a darkness in it, something ancient, something beyond human comprehension, and I knew I had to face it. But I also knew I couldn't do it alone. As I drove, the trees blurred together, dark and ominous, like silent watchers on either side of the road. I could have sworn I saw movement in the corner of my eye, shadows darting between the trunks, but when I looked, nothing was there. The closer I got to Forks, the more uneasy I became. The feeling of being followed, the sensation of eyes on me, never left. The deep, primal fear that had taken root in my gut gnawed at me with each passing mile. Shadow, who had been relatively calm throughout the journey, was now restless, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds, as if he, too, could sense the danger still lurking. The town of Forks. By the time I reached Forks, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the sleepy town. I parked my truck near a small diner and sat there for a moment, gathering my thoughts. The town seemed quiet, almost too quiet, but there was something else too, something that didn't sit right. I walked into the diner, my steps heavy, my body aching. The smell of coffee and grilled food hit me immediately, a strange comfort. The waitress behind the counter gave me a quick look before returning to her work. She didn't seem surprised to see someone walk in covered in blood. Maybe they were used to strange visitors. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice low and friendly. I nodded, still too rattled to say much. She set a mug in front of me and continued to clean the counter, stealing glances at me as though trying to figure out what had happened. I took a sip, the warmth of the coffee doing little to calm the cold that had settled in my chest. That's when I heard it, the sound of the door opening behind me. A man entered the diner, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that looked like it had seen too many years of hardship. His eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on me, he froze for a moment before walking over. "You look like you've seen something," he said, his voice deep and gruff. I looked at him closely. There was something about the way he spoke, the way his eyes lingered on me, that set my nerves on edge. I nodded, not sure where to start. The words seemed stuck in my throat. "I'm Roy," he said, sitting across from me without waiting for an invitation. "You're not the first person to show up here after seeing things." I blinked, trying to focus on his words. "What do you mean? What kind of things?" Roy leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The forest has its secrets, son. It's been this way for a long time. People come, they disappear, and then some of them come back looking for answers. Others, well, they don't come back." I stared at him, my mind racing. "What do you mean? What's out there in the woods?" He paused, glancing at the waitress who had stopped cleaning the counter to listen. She nodded, as if she knew exactly what Roy was about to say. "There are things," Roy began, his voice low, "things that were here long before we were. The native tribes used to talk about them, the ones that live in the woods, hidden from the eyes of men. They're not animals, not the way you think. They're something else." I leaned forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are they? Why didn't anyone tell me?" Roy looked at me with tired eyes. "No one believes the stories until they see it for themselves. And by the time they do, it's usually too late. The woods have a way of calling to people. It pulls them in slowly. At first it's the silence, the peace. Then the forest starts to whisper. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Whisper, he nodded. It calls to you, gets into your head. People start seeing things, hearing things, things that aren't there. They think it's just the isolation, just the forest playing tricks, but it's not. There's something out there, something that watches. It knows when you're alone, and it knows when you're vulnerable." Roy's words settled in my chest like a heavy stone, pressing down on me. I felt my blood run cold. I had always thought the isolation was peaceful, but now I realized it had been far more dangerous than I'd ever known. The town secrets. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of Roy's words pressing on me. I had been so focused on surviving, on escaping the creature that had nearly killed me, that I hadn't stopped to consider what else was out there. The forest wasn't just a collection of trees and wildlife. It was something older, something far darker. Roy seemed to read the confusion and fear on my face, and he leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Whatever it is, it's tied to the land. The forest has been here longer than anyone can remember, and sometimes it lets things out. It lets them roam, and it calls to people like you, people who think they're safe, people who think they can control it. But they're wrong." He sat back, watching me closely. "If you're still thinking about going back to that cabin, you'd better be ready for what's coming. It's not over. It never is." The air in the diner felt suddenly colder. I could feel my breath hitching, the reality of what Roy was saying sinking in. The creature, the whispers in the woods, the strange unease I had felt for days, it was all connected. The woods were alive in ways I hadn't understood. And I had no idea how deep the darkness ran. I stood up, my legs shaky, but before I could leave, Roy spoke again. "There's an old place up near the northern edge of the park," he said, his voice steady. "A place that was abandoned years ago. They say the spirits in the woods are tied to it. If you want answers, that's where you'll find them." I stared at him for a long moment, trying to process everything he had just told me. "What is it?" Roy didn't answer immediately. He just stared at me, his eyes hardening as if he was trying to gauge whether I was brave enough to face whatever was out there. "Something's waiting for you," he said softly. "And it won't stop until it gets what it wants." Part 8, Preparing to Leave. The night was long and filled with unease. Roy's words echoed in my mind, each syllable like a ghostly whisper in the back of my head. I sat alone in the small motel room, its walls closing in around me as the weight of everything I had learned settled on my chest. The creature, the whispers in the woods, the inexplicable things that had been happening. It was all tied together, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had survived the creature's attack, but at what cost? The feeling of being hunted hadn't gone away. It was still there, lurking just beyond the threshold of my mind. It wasn't just the creature that scared me, it was the unknown. The secrets hidden in the forest, the things that had been there long before I ever set foot in these woods. I couldn't keep running. Roy had warned me. He had told me that the forest would call to me, that it was more than just a collection of trees and animals. It was alive, ancient, and unforgiving. And if I wanted to survive, I had to confront whatever it was that waited for me in the northern part of the park. A new plan. I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was just the beginning. There was something bigger, something darker, at play in these woods. The town of Forks was a small, quiet place, and the people who lived here knew far more about the forest's secrets than they let on. But Roy, for all his cryptic warnings, had given me a place to start, an abandoned spot near the northern edge of the park, where the spirits of the woods were said to be tied to. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find there. Answers, I suppose, a way to understand what was going on, maybe a way to stop the creature or at least to figure out what it wanted. I had no illusions. I wasn't prepared for what lay ahead. But I had no choice. Shadow sat by the door, his eyes fixed on me as I grabbed my gear. I had been ignoring him, but I could see the worry in his gaze. He knew something was wrong. He had been through enough to understand that the woods weren't what they seemed. But we couldn't stay here. We couldn't hide forever. I packed a few essentials, a flashlight, my rifle, some food, and the knife Roy had given me in case things got worse. I wasn't sure if it would help, but it was all I had. As I stepped outside into the cold night air, the silence of the forest was deafening. The trees stood tall and dark against the night sky, their twisted branches stretching toward the heavens like skeletal fingers. The wind whispered through the leaves, but it was more than just wind. There was a feeling in the air, a strange energy that sent chills down my spine. I couldn't explain it, but I knew something was waiting out there. And it wasn't going to be easy to find. The journey north. The drive toward the northern edge of the park was long and treacherous. The road was narrow, winding through dense trees, the moonlight casting long shadows across the path. I kept my eyes on the road, but the feeling of being watched never left. It was as if the forest itself was alive, its eyes following me, waiting for me to make a mistake. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, his head resting on the window, his eyes darting back and forth as though he could sense what I couldn't. He whined softly, his unease mirroring my own. I knew he didn't want to go any further. But neither of us had a choice. The air grew colder as I drove deeper into the park. The trees became more densely packed, the road narrowing to a barely visible trail. The lights of the town were long behind us, and the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I thought about what Roy had said. The forest calls to people. What did he mean? What kind of force could make someone do something against their will? How could something so ancient, so powerful, be hidden from the world for so long? The more I thought about it, the less I understood, but I had to find out. The abandoned place. As I neared the northern edge of the park, the road seemed to disappear. The trees grew thicker, and the trail narrowed into a faint path, barely visible beneath the undergrowth. It was like the forest was pushing me deeper, urging me to go farther, to follow the whispers I couldn't hear but felt in my bones. I parked the truck at the edge of the path, grabbing my gear and stepping into the woods. The air felt heavier here, thick with an unnatural stillness. The forest was silent, too silent. There were no birds, no rustling of small animals, nothing to indicate life. Shadow stayed close to my side, his body tense, every muscle coiled like a spring. He could feel it too. I could tell by the way he moved, slow, cautious, like he was stepping into something that shouldn't be disturbed. I took a deep breath and began walking down the path, the underbrush crunching beneath my boots. The trail twisted through the trees, each step taking me further from the world I knew. My breath came in short bursts, the chill of the air stinging my lungs. But it wasn't just the cold that made my skin crawl. It was the sense of something lurking just out of sight, something watching, waiting. The further I walked, the more the trees seemed to close in around me, their twisted branches blocking out the moonlight. The path was barely visible now, the forest swallowing everything in its grasp. I had no idea where I was going, but I couldn't stop. Something inside me urged me to keep moving forward. The clearing. After what felt like hours of walking, the trees began to thin, and I stumbled into a small clearing. The moonlight bathed the area in an eerie glow, casting long shadows across the ground. In the center of the clearing was something that made my blood run cold. A stone structure, ancient and weathered, stood before me. It was shaped like a circle, its stones jagged and uneven, with strange carvings etched into the surface. I couldn't make out the symbols, but they felt wrong. The air here was different, charged with a strange energy. The trees around the clearing seemed to lean in, as though they were watching, listening. I could feel the forest closing in on me again, the walls of trees pressing tighter, trapping me in the center. Shadow growled low in his throat, his body tense as he looked toward the stone structure. I took a step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The clearing felt alive with something ancient and powerful. I had come here for answers, but now that I was standing in front of this place, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The ritual. I circled the stone structure, my eyes scanning the strange symbols etched into the rocks. They seemed to shift in the moonlight as though they were alive, moving just out of sight. I reached out, my fingers brushing against one of the carvings, and as soon as I touched it, I felt a shock of cold run through my body. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, and the trees began to creak, their branches shaking in the night. A low, guttural sound echoed through the forest, and for a moment I thought I heard whispers, soft, distant whispers that seemed to call my name. I pulled my hand away from the stone, my heart racing. The wind stopped as suddenly as it had started, and the clearing fell silent once more. But something had changed. The air felt charged, alive with an energy I couldn't explain. Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled, and I felt a deep, resonating vibration in my chest. The trees around the clearing began to bend, as though some invisible force was pulling them toward the stone structure. The carvings on the rock seemed to glow, the symbols flickering like flames. The whispers grew louder, the forest's embrace. I took a step back, panic rising in my chest. Shadow barked, his fur bristling, and I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. The forest had changed. It was no longer just a collection of trees. It was alive, and it was angry. The ground beneath my feet began to crack, the earth shifting in strange patterns. The energy in the clearing became suffocating, pressing down on me from all sides. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It felt as though the forest itself was closing in, wrapping around me like a vice, forcing me to stay. And then I heard it, the sound of something moving in the trees, something big. I turned quickly, my heart racing. The creature was back. But this time, it wasn't alone. Part 9. The final attempt to escape. The forest was no longer a place of mystery. It had become my prison. The ground beneath me seemed to tremble as the wind howled through the trees, an unnatural force pulling at my every step. The moment I entered the clearing, I had felt it, the suffocating pressure of something ancient and malevolent, watching, waiting. The stone structure stood as a silent sentinel, its carvings glowing faintly in the moonlight, like some forbidden symbol of power, and the weight of that power pressed on me with every breath I took. The creature was out there. I could feel it, its presence creeping toward me like a shadow in the dark. But it wasn't alone this time. I could hear them now, the sounds of more than one, moving through the underbrush, circling, preparing for something. The whispers in the trees had grown louder, as though the forest itself was speaking, but its language was alien, dark, and impossible to understand. My heart pounded in my chest, the fear gnawing at me. I had to get out. There was no other choice. The creature wasn't just stalking me. It was waiting for me to make the first move, waiting to see if I would venture into the heart of its domain. But now, with the forest closing in around me, I knew it had something far darker planned. I turned, my hands shaking as I gripped my rifle. My legs wobbled beneath me, but I fought the panic rising in my throat. I couldn't let fear control me, not now. Shadow, trembling by my side, sensed the danger too. His tail was between his legs, and his growls were quiet but steady, the only sound breaking through the thick, oppressive silence. As I made my way back toward the truck, I thought about what Roy had said. The forest had a way of pulling people in, drawing them toward it like moths to a flame. But it wasn't just the forest. It was them, whatever dark force inhabited it, something ancient, something far older than me, a part of the land itself. The chase begins. The walk back to my truck felt longer than it should have. The shadows seemed to stretch farther, pulling at the edges of the path, closing in on me from every side. The wind shifted, howling louder, and for a moment I thought I heard footsteps behind me, footsteps that weren't my own, that weren't Shadow's. I froze, my breath hitching in my chest. I slowly turned around, rifle raised, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the trees swaying in the wind, their branches creaking in an eerie rhythm. I took a step back, my mind racing. It couldn't have been my imagination. The footsteps had been real. And now I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, the weight of being watched pressing down on me. The sound of heavy breathing broke the silence. It was close, too close. I turned again, and there it was, the creature. It stood just beyond the trees, its glowing eyes fixated on me, its body twitching in the moonlight. It was like a twisted version of an animal, more man than beast, but not quite human either. Its limbs were too long, too spindly, and its fur was matted and dark, the smell of decay still hanging in the air. The creature took a step forward, its claws scraping across the ground with a sound that made my blood run cold. And then another step, and another. I wasn't sure if I could outrun it. I wasn't sure if I could fight it. But I knew one thing. I couldn't stand here waiting for it to finish what it had started. I turned and ran. The chase through the woods. My heart hammered in my chest as I ran, the sound of the creature's pursuit growing louder with each passing second. The trees blurred past me, their twisted branches reaching out as if to grab me, pulling me deeper into the woods. Shadow was ahead of me, his bark a constant reminder that we were not alone. The forest seemed to close in around us, the ground beneath our feet shifting as the creature chased us through the trees. I didn't know where I was going. The path was gone, swallowed up by the wilderness, and the only thing that mattered was putting as much distance between me and the creature as possible. But the deeper we ran, the more the forest seemed to shift, the trees leaning in, blocking the way, trapping us in a never-ending maze. There was no escape, no way out. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, and every breath I took seemed to make the feeling of being hunted worse. The creature's growls echoed through the trees, growing closer, more insistent. I glanced over my shoulder. The creature was gaining on me, its long limbs moving with unnatural speed. It didn't make a sound except for the occasional growl, but its eyes, they glowed with an eerie light, flickering like the embers of a fire, and I knew they were locked onto me. It wasn't just chasing me, it was hunting me. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning, but it didn't matter. The creature was too fast. I could feel its presence just behind me, feel the earth tremble as it moved. The ground shifted beneath my feet. I didn't see it coming. I tripped. The world seemed to tilt and I fell hard to the ground. My knee hit the earth first, followed by my hands scraping against the dirt and rocks. The pain was sharp, but it didn't matter. I had to move. I had to get up. But as I scrambled to my feet, I felt something cold and strong wrap around my ankle. I gasped, my heart leaping into my throat, and before I could react, I was yanked backward, pulled toward the ground. I turned just in time to see the creature's clawed hand gripping my ankle, its eyes glowing with an unsettling hunger. It dragged me through the dirt, its claws scraping against my skin, leaving deep, burning cuts. No. I screamed, reaching for my rifle, but it was too late. The creature was too strong. Its grip tightened and I felt the air leave my lungs. But then something unexpected happened. A roar. A loud, deafening roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath me. The creature stopped, its eyes flickering with confusion. It looked around, its grip loosening on my ankle. I took the opportunity. With every ounce of strength I had left, I kicked out, slamming my boot into the creature's side. It stumbled back, releasing me, and I rolled away, scrambling to my feet. I didn't wait. I didn't look back. I just ran. The encounter with the unseen force. The roar continued. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before. It was primal, ancient, and filled with a power that made my skin crawl. The creature, now fully aware of the danger, turned toward the source of the sound, its body trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel the shift in the air. Something was happening in the woods. I could hear the growls, the sound of something large moving through the trees, but this time it wasn't the creature chasing me. It was something else, something bigger, something more powerful. And then I realized what it was. The forest was alive. The trees began to sway unnaturally, their branches twisting, bending, as though they were moving on their own. The ground beneath my feet shifted again, the earth cracking and opening up, as though some ancient force was rising from below. The roar grew louder, and I could feel the very air vibrating with the power of it. The creature, realizing it was no longer the apex predator, let out a final screech before disappearing into the shadows of the trees. I had no idea what had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone in the woods anymore. The forest itself had awakened. Part 10. The Aftermath and Reflection. I didn't know how long I ran. The minutes felt like hours, and the world around me seemed to blur in a whirlwind of trees, branches, and shadows. But somehow, my legs kept moving. my mind pushing me forward even though every instinct screamed at me to stop. I couldn't stop, not until I was sure I was free. My chest burned with every breath, my body ached from the run and the attack, but my heart raced for another reason entirely. What had just happened? The roar, the strange force that had intervened. I couldn't comprehend it. I was in the forest, but it felt like I had crossed some invisible boundary, one that I hadn't known existed until it was too late. And then there was silence. The type of silence that presses down on you, like the world itself is holding its breath. The calm before the storm. I came to a stop in the middle of a small clearing, gasping for air. The woods around me were unnervingly still. There were no sounds of wind, no animals stirring, no rustling leaves, just the oppressive quiet. I scanned the trees, expecting the creature to burst out at any moment, but there was nothing. It was as though the forest itself had become frozen in time. That's when I heard it, a low, melodic hum, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. The sound resonated deep within me, vibrating in my chest. It was unlike any hum I had ever heard, almost like the heartbeat of the forest itself. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches stretching toward me, as though they were trying to speak. I turned around, expecting to see the creature, but instead, I saw something far more unsettling. There, in the distance, just beyond the line of trees, was the stone structure. The same one I had seen earlier, but now it was different. It was as if the very air around it shimmered with an unnatural energy. The carvings on the stones seemed to glow faintly, pulsing with a strange light that didn't belong in this world. The humming grew louder. A voice in the dark. I couldn't help myself. My feet moved on their own, drawn toward the stone structure as if it was calling to me. It was the same force that had been pulling me through the woods, the feeling of being watched, the sense that something beyond my understanding was leading me deeper into the heart of the forest. But this time it was stronger, more urgent. As I approached the structure, the air became thick with energy. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a strange tingling running down my spine. The stone was warm to the touch, its surface pulsing with a light that seemed to come from within. And then I heard a voice. It wasn't a whisper, but it wasn't loud either. It was a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was as though the voice was inside my head, echoing in my mind, weaving into my thoughts. You have come. You've seen, but you are not yet ready. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. What was speaking to me? I searched the clearing, looking for the source of the voice, but there was nothing. Just the stone, glowing faintly in the darkness. The forest knows you. It has called you here. But there is more you do not understand. The voice was calm, almost soothing, but its words sent a shiver through me. I stepped back, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The forest had called me. The creature was part of it, but what did this voice mean? What was I supposed to understand? The truth revealed. Suddenly the air shifted. The trees groaned, as if waking from a long slumber. The ground beneath my feet trembled, and the stone structure began to glow brighter, the carvings becoming more intricate and detailed, as if they were coming to life. And then I saw it, the truth. The stone was not just a structure, it was a gateway. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the surface of the stone, and in that instant everything changed. A vision washed over me, sweeping through my mind like a flood. I saw the forest, but it wasn't like it was now. This was the forest in its prime, ancient and untouched by time. The trees were taller, their branches reaching out like vast, living webs, their roots stretching deep into the earth, intertwining with the land itself. The creatures of the forest, creatures like the one that had chased me, roamed freely, but they weren't the monsters I had thought them to be. They were guardians, protectors of the land, creatures that kept balance between the earth and the world beyond. But something had changed. The forest had begun to die. Slowly at first, and then all at once. The creatures that had once kept the balance had become twisted, corrupted by an ancient darkness. A darkness that had seeped into the land, into the creatures, into the very heart of the forest. The vision shifted again, showing me images of people, humans, coming into the forest, seeking power, seeking knowledge. They had discovered the creatures and the land's ancient power, and in their greed they had awakened the darkness. They had disturbed the balance. The creatures, once guardians of the land, had turned into something else, something monstrous, and in their hunger for revenge, they had become the predators they were now. The vision pulled back and I was left standing there, breathless, my mind reeling from the truth I had just witnessed. The forest was alive, yes, but it wasn't just the trees or the creatures. It was something much older. The land itself had a consciousness, an ancient being that had watched over the earth for millennia. And now it was angry. It was dying, and in its death, it was trying to reclaim what had been lost. I turned to the stone again, my fingers still trembling from the vision. The voice spoke once more. "You have seen the truth. The forest calls for restoration. It calls for a sacrifice. I didn't understand. Sacrifice? What did it mean?" The voice answered my unspoken question. "The creatures are not evil. They are victims. They were once protectors of this land, but they have been twisted. You must choose, restore the balance and free the forest from its curse, or leave and let the darkness consume it all." I stared at the stone, my mind whirling. The choice was in my hands. I had come here searching for answers, and now I knew the truth. But what could I do? How could I possibly restore the balance? I was just one man, alone in the woods with a creature that had tried to kill me, and now I had to undo the damage that had been done to the very land itself. I looked back toward the path, toward the dark forest that had been my prison for so long. I had fought to survive, but now I had a choice. To fight for the forest, to try and undo the curse that had twisted it, or to leave and let it die. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, torn between the fear that had driven me all this time and the responsibility that now lay before me. The forest had called me here. The darkness had been awakened by human greed and destruction, but I couldn't walk away. Not after everything I had seen, everything I had experienced. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I had made my decision. I wasn't leaving. In this final part, the story takes a dramatic turn as the truth about the forest, its creatures, and the darkness that has corrupted them is revealed. The forest, once seen as a simple backdrop for terror, is now understood to be alive, conscious, and deeply connected to the balance of the world. The protagonist is faced with an impossible choice: to restore the balance and fight against the forces of darkness, or to leave it to consume everything. The stakes are raised as the truth comes to light, and the protagonist's ultimate fate rests on the difficult decision ahead. Ethan Caldwell had always been a man of reason, a man who believed in the tangible, the explainable, and the practical. As a former lawyer, he had spent his life in the hustle of the corporate world, a world that thrived on logic and control. Yet when the weight of that life became unbearable, when the greed, the manipulation, and the suffocating nature of it all had driven him to the edge he sought escape, the choice was simple. He would leave the noise behind, retreat to the calm and peaceful isolation of the wilderness, far from the complexities of human life. He chose the forest, with its promise of peace and solitude, thinking he could regain his sense of self, free from the chains of his past. But the forest did not offer the escape he expected. What Ethan found there was far darker, far more ancient than he could ever have imagined. Instead of tranquility, the forest became a place of fear, a place where the supernatural, the mysterious, and the unknown had a way of seeping into his every waking moment. What began as a search for inner peace quickly transformed into a battle for survival, as Ethan found himself not alone in the woods, but hunted by a malevolent force that had existed long before he arrived. From the moment he encountered the creature, a monstrous, twisted being of fur, scale, and unnatural strength, Ethan's world shifted. The forest, once a sanctuary, had become his prison. The creature was relentless, an embodiment of the darkness that had taken root in the land. It stalked him, tormented him, and forced him to confront a terrifying truth. There was more to the forest than he could see. There were ancient forces, older than time itself, that lurked in the shadows, waiting to be awakened. As Ethan delved deeper into the mystery of the forest, he began to realize that his struggle wasn't just against the creature. It was against an ancient curse, a darkness that had been unleashed by human greed and desire. The creature was not evil by nature. It was a guardian, twisted by the very forces that had corrupted the land. The forest, once thriving with life, had been poisoned by the same forces that had caused the creature to turn against its purpose. And now, Ethan was faced with a choice: to fight back and restore the balance, or to abandon the forest to its fate and walk away from the nightmare. The deeper Ethan ventured into the forest, the more he learned about the land's history, about the ancient bond between the creatures of the forest and the natural world. The stone structure he discovered, the carvings, the whispers, they all pointed to a truth that Ethan couldn't ignore. The forest had a consciousness, a life force that had been connected to the earth for centuries. And now it was dying, slowly being consumed by the darkness that had seeped into its very core. But Ethan's journey wasn't just about survival, it was a journey of understanding. In the midst of the terror, the chase, and the constant threat of death, Ethan began to understand the true nature of the forest. It wasn't simply a place of fear. It was a place of balance, of interconnectedness. The creatures, the trees, the very earth. It was all part of a delicate ecosystem that had been disrupted by human interference. And in that moment, Ethan realized that his fight was not just for his own survival. It was for the survival of something far greater than himself. The forest, the creatures, and the natural balance that had been threatened by mankind's relentless pursuit of power. The truth Ethan uncovered, that the forest was not just a collection of trees and animals, but a living, breathing entity, was both horrifying and enlightening. The forest was alive with memories, with ancient forces that had been disturbed by human actions. But the creature, though terrifying, was not the true enemy. The true enemy was the darkness that had corrupted the forest, the very force that had turned the guardians of the land into predators. And in this realization, Ethan found his purpose. In the end, Ethan chose to face the darkness, to restore the balance that had been lost. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew the forest's wrath would not be easily quelled. But he also knew that he could not walk away, not after everything he had seen and learned. The forest had called him, not just to survive, but to understand, to learn, and to fight for the natural world that had once been so pure. The profound lesson of Ethan's journey. Ethan Caldwell's story is one of transformation. It is a journey from fear to understanding, from isolation to connection, and from survival to purpose. What began as a simple escape from the pressures of modern life became a journey that forced him to confront the very essence of life itself, its interconnectedness, its fragility, and its power. At its core, Ethan's story teaches us several profound lessons. We cannot escape from the challenges of life by running away. Ethan sought to escape from the pressures and corruption of his previous life, believing that isolation in the forest would give him the peace he desperately needed. However, he found that running away from his problems only led him to face even greater challenges. The forest, much like life, does not offer an easy escape. The real growth comes when we face our fears head-on, when we confront the very darkness we try to avoid. There is power in understanding and empathy. In the beginning, Ethan saw the creature as nothing more than a monster to be feared. But as he learned more about the forest and the creature's true nature, he realized that the monster was not inherently evil. It was a victim, much like him. The true enemy was the darkness that had corrupted the land. Understanding the creature, its purpose, and its connection to the land allowed Ethan to make a choice not driven by fear, but by empathy and a desire to restore balance. This teaches us that in life, our enemies are often born of circumstances beyond their control, and empathy can turn fear into understanding. Balance is key to survival. Ethan's journey reveals that balance between nature, between people, and between the forces of light and dark is crucial for survival. The forest, when in balance, is a place of life, but when disrupted, it becomes a place of danger. In the same way, our lives are built on balance. We cannot thrive in chaos, nor can we live in isolation. True peace comes when we align ourselves with the natural flow of life and work to restore balance in our own lives. Courage is found in the face of the unknown. As Ethan ventured deeper into the forest, he was faced with countless unknowns, danger, fear, and confusion. Yet, he found the courage to press forward, even when the path ahead seemed impossible. The unknown is often the greatest challenge we face in life, but it is also where we find our true strength. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to face it, to step into the unknown despite the fear that tries to hold us back. We are all connected to the world around us. Ethan's final understanding of the forest's living consciousness teaches us that everything in the natural world is interconnected. The health of the forest, the creatures, and the earth itself is tied to the actions of humans. Our own actions, whether we acknowledge them or not, affect the world around us. This connection reminds us of our responsibility to the planet and to one another, and that true harmony comes when we recognize and honor our interdependence with all living things. Ethan's journey, with all its darkness and light, offers us a reminder that the path to peace is not an easy one. It requires courage, understanding, and a willingness to face the unknown. But it also offers us hope, that in the midst of fear we can find our purpose, that in the face of darkness we can restore balance. If you found value in Ethan's story and the lessons it teaches, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, you support the creation of more content like this, stories that explore the depths of fear, understanding, and transformation. Your support is what motivates us to continue sharing these stories, stories that challenge us, inspire us, and encourage us to grow. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Together, we can keep uncovering the mysteries of life, learning, and growing. Subscribe now and join us as we continue to dive deeper into the world of stories that matter. End of the journey, but not the end of the story.